Alright guys, so last week, Game Freak officially made their announcement of Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee for the Nintendo Switch coming out later this year. And honestly, I just can't make myself care about these games. Nothing about them really appeals to me. They're obviously aimed more towards the Pokemon Go crowd, which I'm not part of, so I'm not really into it. But at the end of their announcement, they did go ahead and say that the new main series games are going to be coming out next year in 2019. So that got me thinking about, what kind of things we're going to see in those games, what kind of features they're going to have. And I just wanted to make a quick video here talking about some of the things that I'd personally like to see Game Freak do in Pokemon's 8th generation. Now, I want to make this clear that this isn't a predictions list. In fact, a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about here, I pretty much expect they absolutely won't have in the final game. But these are the things that I'd personally like to see, so that's what I'm going to talk about. And at the absolute top of that list, first and foremost, I have to mention they need to bring back the National Pokedex. I've been bitching about this for 2 years, and I'm going to keep on bitching about it because there was absolutely no reason for them to take it out in the first place. I don't know what they were thinking with that. There is really no justification to remove such a core feature to the games. It didn't really benefit anything. The National Dex in Pokemon Bank is not a substitute. It's just not. So hopefully they'll correct that with these games. There's really no reason not to. And that's one of the things that honestly had a big impact on me, like not rating the Gen 7 games as high as I would if it weren't for that one simple feature. So hopefully that'll be corrected. That's probably my most wanted thing from the Switch games. Now, as far as Pokemon goes, I'm not gonna get into any specifics about like any actual Pokemon they're gonna be, what the legendaries are gonna be based on, or anything real specific like that. But I will say the main thing that I want to see out of the group of Pokemon they introduce as a whole is that I'd like to see a more mix of everything. And when I say everything, I mean a few new Mega Evolutions, a few new regional variants, a few new legacy evolutions. So new evolutions or pre-evos for some of the older Pokemon, split evolutions. We recently, got the leak of the old Gold and Silver demo from years ago, and it had a lot of beta baby Pokemon in it that ended up not getting made into actual Pokemon in the final game. So maybe they could take some of those ideas and actually make them into Pokemon all these years later and introduce them in these games. There's lots of things they can do. They've come up with a lot of these different gimmicks over the years, like megas and regional variants, and then they just abandon them really quickly. And I think that's dumb. Megas and regional variants, arguably more so with the variants, is an absolute great idea. I love the concept of them, but they only explore them a little bit and then they drop them when they move on to the next game. And I think that's not really taking full advantage of the stuff that they've come up with so far. So hopefully they'll expand on each one of these more in the future, especially regional variants, since they were limited to just Gen 1 Pokemon in the Gen 7 games. Which again, I think was stupid. They should have just, done a few from each gen, kind of more similar to what they did with Mega Evolutions. So that's one of the main things I'd like to see as far as the Pokemon as a whole go. And of course, have a fairly large set of just brand new species of Pokemon as well, like any normal generation would have. Preferably closer to around 100. I know the last 2 generations, there's only been like 70 or 80, so I'd like to see them bump that back up to closer to the 3-digit range. That's just me personally. If they don't, it's not really a big deal. Also, I'd really like to see some more primal reversions. I know they did that with Kyogre and Groudon and never did it with anyone else. They might have to wait until Diamond and Pearl remakes. This might be a better time for it. But when they do, I would love to see like a Primal Arceus. That'd be a good way to like reposition him in his rightful place as the most powerful Pokemon as far as like base stat total. Because as it stands right now, both the Mega Mewtwo's and Mega Rayquaza are stronger than him. And since he was the one that was supposed to like create the entire universe, it really doesn't make sense for him to not be the strongest. So they could have him revert back to a stronger form, and that could reposition him at the top. So that's a thing I wouldn't mind seeing. I wouldn't mind seeing more Ultra Beasts either. I highly doubt that the story of the Gen 8 games are going to be focused on Ultra Beasts again, since they're pretty heavily focused in all the Gen 7 games. But again, that's a really cool concept. Pokemon from another world. I think there's a lot more they could do with it. I'd like to see more smaller ones that evolve, kind of like Poipole. So again, there's a lot of room there to grow, and I hope they take advantage of that. Also, more Z moves. I know that technically isn't Pokemon, it's a move, but I'd like to see that too. The Z moves are a cool concept. Giving some more unique moves to a wider range of Pokemon, it'd be a good way to flesh out just the concept as a whole. So, again, I'd like to see that too. Next, this is kind of an older feature, but I'd love for them to bring back the Versus Seeker. A lot of the different games have had ways to rebattle trainers that you meet throughout the world, but out of all the methods they've had, the Versus Seeker was my favorite because it was simple, it was easy to use, you could use it on pretty much every trainer in the entire game. So I really like that idea, and they never really went back to it. They've used other methods like the Pokenav in the Gen 3 games and the remakes of Oris, and that was okay, but I still prefer the Versus Seeker method. It helps a lot later in the game when you're just trying to level up random Pokemon you have on your team to maybe get them to 100 or whatever. Speaking of which, to kind of go along with that, I'd also like to see them switch back to the flat EXP gain model. Which, for anyone that doesn't know, most of the games use one of two basic EXP models. One is the flat model that doesn't take into account the level difference between your Pokemon and its opponent. The other is the scaled model, which was originally introduced in Gen 5, and they also used it in the Gen 7 games, which factors in the Pokemon's levels. So, like for example, if your Pokemon's level 10 and it beats a level 15, then it would gain more experience than if it was level 14 and beat a level 15. Which sounds like it makes more sense on the surface, and in a way it does. And it does speed up like the early game as far as leveling things up goes. But it kind of catches up to you later in the game when your Pokemon are like around level 80 or so. Getting them from 80 to 100 is a lot slower and a lot more tedious. Mainly because there aren't really any place you can take them to train besides like rebattling the Elite Four a bunch of times, or like going to the very in-game levels and fighting wild Pokemon that are like in their mid-50s. So they're gaining less EXP from those mons because there's such a level difference, and it really just slows down the whole process. So if they insist on sticking with the scaled EXP model, then I hope they make some sort of area where either there's trainers with Pokemon or wild Pokemon that are a much higher level. So you could take your like level 80 plus Pokemon there and train them, and they could grow a lot faster than anywhere else. That could also solve the problem. So either one of those would be fine with me. Next, I'd love for them to bring back soaring and diving. Soaring, was introduced in Oris, where you could fly around in the sky, encounter Pokemon, go to certain locations. Diving, where you go under the water, which was only ever used in Gen 3 and Gen 5. The move is in every generation, but it wasn't an HM in them, so you couldn't use it in the overworld. That adds a lot more depth to the regions, I think. It gives you a lot more areas to explore, and it's just kind of cool. So that's one thing I'd like to see them put into these games, especially on the Switch, which is obviously going to have better graphics. I think that would look cool flying through the air, diving underwater. It's a good opportunity for some cool visuals. So I'd like to see them add both those back in. Also, speaking of Oris, they need to bring back the Dex Nav. Dex Nav is absolutely my favorite feature they've ever introduced. It was the best way to find Pokemon the way you wanted them, if you wanted a specific nature, specific ability, what have you. It made it a lot easier to get the hidden abilities. It was the best method they've ever had for getting hidden abilities. The Gen 5 method absolutely sucked with the Dream World, and now it's not even available anymore. And then the Gen 7 method with SOS battles is tedious and kind of aggravating. So I much prefer the Dex Nav method. I want them to bring that back. Obviously, they can call it something different because we probably won't have a Pokenav in these games since it's not going to be Hoenn. So they could call it something else. They could tweak how it works a little bit, whatever they want to do. But I want something that works in a similar fashion to come back in these games, because it would just make catching Pokemon the way you want them a lot more efficient. Next is another thing. I see some people mentioning this, but not a lot. As far as trainer customization, I'm sure they're going to keep that feature. But the thing I'd really like to see is more customization option for the male players. In both the Gen 6 and the Gen 7 games, it's really skewed towards the female players having a ton more different options as far as like their clothing, their hair, pretty much everything. So I want to see them balance that out a little more, just so people that play as a male can have more different options. Especially in the Gen 7 games. I felt like the Gen 7 games were really lacking as far as clothing options went. You couldn't get long pants at all, even though there was like snowy mountains and stuff in certain areas. So I want to see more of a variety with that for both, but especially for the boys, because we've kind of gotten shafted in the past, so they need to expand on that. One thing I would like for them to keep that they introduced in Gen 7 was the Poke Ride system, which is absolutely an improvement over the HMs, the hidden machines. Having to keep a Pokemon on your team that knew HM moves so you could get around was annoying. It took up your slots. Poke Ride is a lot more efficient. It's easier to use. If anything, if they wanted to tweak it, I wouldn't mind the idea of actually being able to ride around on your own Pokemon instead of like random Pokemon that you just summon. Like at least giving you the option to use someone from your team, I think could be cool. Excuse me. So I hope they keep that feature. It's definitely an improvement over the past, and it's one of the more useful things they introduced in Gen 7. So I'd appreciate that coming back. Now, the next thing I want to mention here is one of the things that's more likely, I think, to actually happen, especially with it being on the Switch. But it's something that's pretty long overdue for Pokemon games, and that's the fact that we need basic RPG elements that have pretty much become staples across the genre. Things like difficulty levels, things like multiple save files, which I don't own a Switch myself, but from other people who do, based on what they said and like how the user profiles work, I'd say that the multiple save files are pretty likely to happen. Even if you have to like log in as a different user to make it work, it could be a little more aggravating, but either way, it'll be fine. So that's something they really need to add. How they've gotten away with not adding that for 20 years, I have no idea. Of course, years ago they had the excuse of technological limitations, but they don't have that anymore. It's something that should have been put in a long time ago. You shouldn't have to delete your entire game just to play through it one more time. They could add a new game plus option too. That could be nice. That way you could re-experience the story without like losing all your items and Pokemon and stuff. That could also be very helpful. As far as the different difficulty levels go, I know they did that in Gen 5, but they botched it really bad because like you couldn't unlock it until the end of the game, and even then you could only unlock either easy or hard, and you had to like interact with the opposite version to unlock the other. So that was just a really dumb way of doing it. I don't know why they implemented it that way, especially because even if you unlock it, you have to like delete your entire save and start over to even take advantage of it. So it just didn't really make sense. Hopefully they can just do those basic kind of genre-wide things and step it up in that department. Now, the last thing I want to talk about here is something I haven't really seen anybody else mention before. And it's a more specific thing, but it's something that I personally would find a lot more helpful. We have, the ability capsule that lets you change your Pokemon's ability if you catch one and it's not the ability that you wanted. I'd like to see a similar item that can change your Pokemon's nature, because sometimes even if you're using a synchronizer, getting one in the nature that you want can take forever, especially if you have bad luck, because I know when I was trying to catch I think it was a Morlul in Pokemon Moon, I had to catch like 15 to 20 of them just to get one in the right nature, and I was using a synchronizer. So something like that is aggravating, especially if you catch a shiny and like everything about it just happens to be perfect except for the nature. It would just be a lot easier if we could go buy some kind of item and change their nature the same way that we can buy an item and change their ability. I don't see why one would be any different than the other. So if they added in a nature changing item, I think that would be pretty useful, for me personally at least, and for people that play competitive. I'm not even a competitive player, but for people that are building competitive teams, it could speed up that process a lot too. So yeah, that's basically it. Those are the things I'd like to see. How many of them we'll actually see, I don't know. I don't really expect a lot of them to be put in, like I said. But that's my thoughts on it. Be sure to leave a comment. Tell me what you think, the features you'd like to see added in. I know a lot of people want the following Pokemon back. Personally, I honestly don't care either way. As far as the following Pokemon go, if it's there, cool. If it's not, I don't mind. But anything you want to see added in, put in the comments below. Subscribe, like, you guys know the drill. You know what to do. So, yeah, I guess that's all I got to say. So, lots of luck to you and yours.